Namaste. Psychoanalysis and philosophy, change, transformation, and healing. Transformation was central to Wilfred Bion, and so it is to many a psychotherapist. The process of transformation is deep, esoteric, and difficult. Nevertheless, it has always been a cardinal area within the field of psychoanalysis. So let us do this journey of a deep dive with our psychoanalysis consultant, Mr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, Mr. Vaidya. Mr. Vaidya, how do we enter into these three terms, change, transformation, and healing?
Change is a fundamental fact of nature. Change is ceaseless. Quantum mechanics tells us that every substance emits photons all the times. Classical physics also tells us that entropy keeps increasing all the time. Physics tells us that everything is changing all the time. Biology tells us human body is aging at every moment and is changing. And psychology tells us that thoughts and feelings are ceaseless, almost ceaseless, and we keep changing moment to moment. So change is a fundamental fact of nature. In a small measure or in radical large quantum, change always keeps happening. But we are not concerned with it unless it brings about some change in a significant way. So there is a threshold above which change becomes significant and noticeable. And it also has certain results for us. Now, when that kind of change happens in that quantum, which has an effect on us, which is substantial, which is noticeable, for that kind of change, we have two words. On the positive side of change, we have the word called transformation. On the negative side of change, we have the word called degradation. So, transformation usually we use when the change is significant, produces some noticeable result, and is on the positive side. That is where we call transformation. This transformation in psychoanalysis can happen in two ways. One, there can be a transformation in the person because of which quality of life enhances, which is seen in classical psychoanalysis more. Second, there can be a transformation in a person whereby the symptoms for which he has come to psychoanalytic psychotherapy, they reduce or are erased. And therefore, that particular form of transformation, the second form, where the transformation relates to reduction or cessation of symptoms, is what we call as healing. But healing is not the only thing that happens, because transformation is a wider word than healing. We use the word healing when the symptoms have reduced or erased. But transformation is a wider word, and in transformation there is a space where it may not have to do with the symptoms which the person has brought to therapy. So if a person comes to therapy for symptoms, then in the non-symptom area of his mental life, there may be a sustainable, positive, radical change, which we will call transformation, but which may not be healing. But if the person is in classical psychoanalysis, not in psychoanalytic psychotherapy, then the proportion of transformation which is not healing in the classical sense of the term, reduced focus sense of the term, that non-healing part of transformation will be much wider. Now, this becomes very important because this is at the center of all that we are doing. We do psychoanalysis or we do psychoanalytic psychotherapy primarily for changing ourselves. Knowing ourselves is only a step to change ourselves. And this transformation therefore is central to entire psychotherapy, not only psychoanalytic psychotherapy, because we want to know how exactly is transformation happening, how exactly is healing happening. And this is at the core. Because we don't know the very certain biological basis or any other basis of what we are doing, and we are a discipline, the whole psychotherapy is a discipline where we are not clear about the fundamentals. Because we are not clear about the fundamentals, we have many opinions on how transformation happens. But there is no one opinion which is either comprehensive or certain. This is where the significance of this discussion comes about, more so after Bjorn wrote a very good book called Transformation. And Bjorn talked about two broad areas of transformation. One area he called intellectual transformation, and second area he called transformation of O. And O is that ineffable event, that ineffable psychological event where we can't really see the event, but we can know the event has happened by its outcomes. And the event per se is not located in the classically known intellectual space. So all that we do, the intervention, the interpretation, the transference, counter-transference, projective identification, analysis and its use, all of that according to Bjorn falls in that intellectual transformation space. And he says there is yet another space where transformation can be rooted or from where transformation can happen. So this creates three different scenarios. Scenario one, transformation happens only in the intellectual space. Two, transformation happens in the intellectual space only when something in that space of ineffable O allows it to happen and allows it to move to completion. Situation three, where transformation starts in the ineffable O zone and then moves into the intellectual transformation space. And situation four, transformation completely happens in the ineffable O zone without much work or even much recognition of that process in the intellectual transformation space or the regular therapy space. Now, this being inauguration by Bjorn, it leads us to further inquiry, because if there are parts of transformation that we cannot account for, there can be two parts to it. One, it is just unknown to us and it requires more thinking, more luck and more observation. Or two, what we are looking for might be situated in a paradigmatically different space. And given our present paradigm, the answers are not there in the present paradigm. And therefore, the space of the ineffable O did not necessarily be unknowable. It may be a space of a different paradigm. And that will take us to search of a new paradigm in the context of which the causation and healing of pathology has to be understood. And this is where a new model of mind would then become necessary. Because if the causation of pathology and the transformation, which is healing of pathology, cannot be understood in the present framework, obviously we need a new framework, and the new framework inevitably will bring out a new model of the mind. Because only in the context of the new model of the mind, a new pathogenesis and a new healing event can be described. Now, this is where we are at present. And the second important element, which is so important about this discussion on transformation, is if we know more about transformation, it can allow us to create that holistic healing grid, which is the dream of all those who believe in holistic healing, and it is the subject matter for research for the next 25 years, which is Can we create a grid where we can have personality, pathology, intensity of pathology, mild, moderate, and severe, and therefore, for each given instance, the best way to go forward in healing? Should you deploy CBT? Should you deploy psychoanalysis? Should you deploy DBT? If psychoanalysis, which school should be deployed? If multiple should be deployed, what should be the order? There are no guidelines of that type. It is all left to the intuition, creativity, and experience of the therapist. We are still in that ignorance, area of ignorance on this point. So even if we want to create that grid of holistic healing, we need more insights on how transformation actually happens.
Why is transformation so central to psychoanalysis?
Because it is at the center of that thing which is our goal. So we do psychoanalysis primarily for two purposes. One, to heal the person of his symptoms, because the symptoms are causing suffering. And two, the person has a desire, a Socratic desire to know oneself even more. So 99% of people come to psychoanalysis to heal their symptoms. And 1% of people come out of the Socratic urge to know oneself. In either of the cases, what has caused the problems that one has and how the problem will be solved and what is the quickest, the best and the most efficient way and the least painful way of solving the problem. All of that can be answered only if we know more about transformation. So transformation is at the center of psychoanalysis in terms of the results we are trying to achieve, because we are trying to answer here the question, what is it that allows us to produce results we want? And what is it that holds back our achieving the results we want? So these two questions can be answered only if we go deeper into the area of transformation. And secondly, it also brings out the holistic nature of this whole enterprise. As we go deeper into it, we will know, as we go deeper into this discussion, and we try to answer the question, what all ways lead to this transformation? Because there is no one way which leads to transformation. There are multiple ways which lead to transformation. And once we have that in mind, psychoanalysis as an enterprise becomes far more holistic rather than being dogmatic about a school or a technique as it is today.
Can you describe that elusive process when that healing happens, or the elusive process of healing?
If we look at the healing process, we can look at two different ends of a container. One end where we go to a therapy room or a workshop or some healing space with a clear intention to heal a particular problem. We do what we are asked to do and it produces results. The most known aspect of healing. The only thing here we don't know is whatever we do, what does it do deep inside where some event happens which we call healing. For example, if we are told to release our feelings and undergo catharsis, what happens once the feelings are released? That we get healed. We may not know that fundamental aspect, but we definitely know that by releasing the feelings, we have got better. Why releasing the feelings leads you to health, leads you to healing, that is still to be found out. That is still a meta-psychological question. But we know at least to this level that by catharsis we have realized healing. So the elusiveness, the deep nature of healing, the unknown nature of healing, that is minimum in this part, where we go with a purpose, we do what we are asked to do, and we get results. Here, the only unknown is at the most fundamental levels. Otherwise, much of the superstructure is known. Contrast this to the other end of the spectrum, where healing happens, transformation happens without a direct cause-effect relationship with what we are doing. So we may be working on X in direction Z, and Y gets healed by itself. And we don't know how Y has got healed because he never worked on Y in the first place. So nothing is known about transformation here. So this creates two ends of the continuum. The one end of the continuum where transformation is least unknown, to the second end of the continuum where transformation is least known. And in between is the whole space. The whole space created by how the process of healing is moving forward. So there are four forces working here. What the therapist does to the patient, what the patient does to himself and to therapy, the environment, and the state in which the person is. And all these forces, they are, and if you believe karma also, all these tetrad of forces are working upon the person, and the net result is his movement on that continuum. Slow or fast, large or small. And there, the elusive nature of the transformation comes about, because we don't know exactly how it is happening in the most fundamental way, but we do know in a macro way how our interpretations, our effort, patient's efforts, change in the environment are producing results. So we are in that mid zone where it is not completely unknown, it is not completely known. The nature of this transformation has three characteristics to it. One, it is deep. It is not something on the surface. It is happening at great depths of our system. So it is deep. One. Two, it is esoteric. It is not something practical. It is not something that we experience on an everyday basis in a concrete, externalized way, like we experience most things. So it is esoteric. It is not something that is everyday, clear, concrete experience either outside or inside. So it is esoteric. It's also esoteric because of the whole zone of the unknown, which may have some components of unknowable also. So that makes it esoteric. And it is elusive. It is not easy to capture. It escapes us. It's very slippery. It's hard to catch, capture, and store. So many times you will see you have been working on something, you sit with it for many days, and on some day healing happens. And at that moment you can see the process, but if you try to recollect, it's very difficult to recollect that process and describe it very concretely. It's a very elusive process. It eludes our capture. It eludes our intellect. It eludes our capturing it in memory and putting it in front of us as an object of contemplation so we can know it concretely and clearly. So these three characteristics are there. The transformation process is deep, it is esoteric, and it is elusive. And it is the elusiveness has its own continuum. It may be just elusive, or it may be something which is fighting repression, and therefore is not accessible, and it may be elusive for some esoteric reason we don't know. So this elusiveness itself is a mystery into itself. That why should this process be so elusive? There is no doubt it is elusive, because we all have undergone transformations many times in our life in a variety of contexts. But it is almost like accessing a traumatic memory when it's not a traumatic memory. It is something that has been worked through. So why should something which has been worked through so difficult to recollect and redraw from our memory, retrieve from our memory? So there is something about it which is not fully understood. This elusiveness of the healing process itself is a mystery not fully understood. And there may be far deeper reasons of nature or of the human mind or maybe of the universe behind it. This is something we have just not opened up as an area, the elusiveness of certain processes in the mind. And elusiveness is a fact of many events in the mind. Why should there be such elusiveness? Because we cannot always explain the elusiveness by defensive work. Because we are dealing here with issues that are solved issues or issues undergoing solving. It is not a traumatic memory we are trying to access per se. So, elusiveness as a concept is yet not fully explored within psychoanalysis, and elusiveness related to transformation even more so, but this part requires far more urgent attention than other parts or other manifestations of elusiveness.
So far we talked about a process of healing in therapy, which is like focused on healing. But can healing happen in, say, by lifestyle changes or meditation or spiritual practices without really focusing on healing?
Answer is yes, but a qualified yes. We should not stretch this yes too far and make it unconditional. For example, does it happen? Yes, it does happen. But can it be prescribed as a general therapeutic procedure? The answer is no. So the question then is, where does this happen? This happens in certain contexts. First, if we classify pathology into mild, moderate, and severe, in the mild category, often this can happen. That a person may take to meditation, spirituality, holistic healing, or lifestyle change, and without any therapy or medicine, the person may get healed. And I am talking about therapy in the normal sense of the term. Under holistic healing, under spirituality, there is a therapy of a different type. Therapy from the Eastern point of view, not from the Western point of view. So it is not correct to say there is no therapy. There is therapy, but therapy from an Eastern standpoint, not from a Western standpoint. So those mild category issues can be healed, number one. Number two, there is a situation of harvesting to heal, harvest to heal. Now this is a very unique situation. This happens many times. For example, somebody has been in therapy for a long time, has been able to heal some of the issues, and some of the issues just persist and the person gets tired of it. And he then tries spirituality, holistic healing, lifestyle changes and so on, and he gets healing. Now what is happening here is the phenomena of harvesting. That many therapists, probably some psychiatrists also would have worked on the person and brought the person from stage A to stage B. And that stage is very near to stage C, the stage of healing. And the last push is given by lifestyle, meditation, spirituality and they are actually building upon already what was established or built before. It's like putting the last stone on the building sort of thing. So this is where I say harvest to heal. And this happens not only in this context, even in the context of therapies. Somebody may have done 4 different therapies and lastly come to psychoanalysis and got healed, and psychoanalysis gets all the credit. Similarly, somebody may have done 10 different therapies for 15 years, then goes to CBT and gets healed, and CBT gets the credit. That does not mean therapies before did not do anything at all. But the last therapy which led the person to the healing point takes the credit, and this is what is the harvesting of all that was done before. So the second situation there is the situation of harvesting. The third situation there is a deep-seated transformation is awaiting only for 1 or 2 elements. Very often, the element in question may be internalization of a omnipotent good object. And spirituality allows you opportunities to internalize omnipotent good object in many ways, more than one. It may be the God you believe in, it may be the guru that you believe is omnipotent, or it may be the spiritual technique that you believe is omnipotent. So this may be the reason why in certain group of people, because the whole healing was waiting only for the need of an omnipotent good object to be internalized, and this spirituality allowed him to do it, that healing which was stalled in the last 2 steps, the last 2 steps are taken and the person gets healed. So these are some of the situations. There are a few more where this works, that the person has stopped therapy or never gone for therapy and gone for these 3 things, and yet it has worked. But we have to be careful that this is an exception, not the rule. Because if we are looking at moderate to severe cases, then this may not be the right thing, and we have to go by the classical method of psychiatrist and psychotherapist. Second part about this is, can we not use this as a complementing thing to the classical healing method? Of course, it can be used as a complementing thing. The idea of spiritual practices, the idea of lifestyle changes, idea of meditation are good ideas to add on to the regular healing thing which is going on anyway. So this is how transformation can be looked at from the background of how it happens many times only by virtue of lifestyle change, meditation or spirituality.
How does psychoanalysis understand the process of transformation?
That is a very complex question, because each school in psychoanalysis has its own understanding of how transformation happens. The oldest and the classical way of looking at transformation is this, that in the fundamental sense, in the unconscious mind, there is something called a complex. And complex is an entity which is constituted of traumatic memories. This has 2 components, an ideational component and an affective component. And the affect is joined to that central ideational component. It's almost like a nucleus and an atom. So the nucleus is that ideational component surrounded by a lot of affect. And this link between affect and the ideational component can be broken through a variety of ways. It can be interpretation, it can be observation, it can be many things. And once this affect is set free, not linked to that ideational center anymore, and the unconscious ideational center is made conscious, the healing happens. So this is the first and the oldest understanding of how transformation happens. The idea is the pathology is because of a complex. Complex is constituted of an ideational component which traps affect, and this ideational component has to be made conscious, affect has to be set free, and you can do it by catharsis. This is the first understanding. Second understanding comes from the idea of the self. It comes from self-psychology school. It says that the pathology is essentially because of formation of an unhealthy self. And transformation happens when the unhealthy self is able to transform itself into a healthy self. And this happens through self-object experiences, holding, empathy, living out early life desires, by alter ego experiences, by twinship, by mirroring and idealization, and by providing a safe space. The third way of looking at it is by articulation of desire, that related to the problem, there is a desire which is not fully articulated. And when the desire is fully articulated in ideational and affective terms, it can lead to transformation. It's a more Lacanian way of looking at it. Then we look at another way, object relations way, to achieve transformation. It is to internalize a good, reliable, stable object. Then we look at the cognitive way, the way of knowledge and clarity. That once we have adequate knowledge and clarity about that event, the traumatic event, the complex dissipates and transformation happens. Some people look at validation and knowledge, providing words to the unknown, validating, allowing the person to join a community by validation and knowledge, which leads to transformation. Some schools use knowledge, that if the person can know what is happening to him, transformation is easy. Some use belonging to the community, that you are not alone to whom this has happened. Just the fact that what has happened to me happens to many people, this fact itself is a very healing and transforming fact for many. Some use the idea of countering one set of entities by another. So if there is too much of negative thinking, go for positive thinking and counterbalance the forces. So counterbalancing is an approach which is used by some people to achieve transformation. Some talk about neutralization, that the life force and the death force or opposing forces have to be neutralized in a way that the positive force on the net gains an upper hand, and that is how transformation can be achieved. Essentially, it is like saying neutralizing anger with love. Then we have the whole process of individuation, that transformation can be achieved by revisiting our individuation process, attending to it, understanding it, putting efforts behind it, and getting in tune with our collective unconscious, our archetypal part of our unconscious, and in tune with it, try to move forward on the path of individuation. So that is what will give us transformation. Some would say it is movement from paranoid schizoid to depressive position which will give us transformation. Some will say it is being able to overcome the fear of the terrible unknown, which is implicit in every thought process which leads to this catastrophizing of thought process, overcoming which with hope, trust, and positivity, which will lead to transformation. And some say it is re-establishment of a new equilibrium. So they say there was an equilibrium at one point. Some traumatic event disturbed that equilibrium and created a pathological equilibrium. And now we have to dismantle that and re-establish a healthy equilibrium. So they look forward to it from a equilibrium standpoint. Some people say we have to just bring out the murderous and the torturous rage and deep-seated feelings of anger, pain, guilt to achieve transformation. And different people use different techniques to make happen these events. Whatever event they believe best brings about transformation the quickest.
If we were to draw a force field around the process of transformation, what are the forces working for or against transformation?
We try to draw a force field around the central process of transformation. We can list out certain forces which are involved in that force field. First is the environment, what the environment does to the person. Second is the capacity of the person to undergo the healing process. Third is the resistance which is coming up from the person. Fourth is the capability of the therapist. And the fifth is, if you believe, the karmic part of it. And if you want a more secular version of it, the ineffable O zone, whatever way it is working. So these are the 5 elements which are very important in as players in that playground of transformation. So if you draw a force field, all the 5 act, and the net result of the 5 is what causes the movement on that path of transformation towards healing or towards a better quality of life. And the not known part of it is the karmic part of it, or the unknown or the unknowable as yet part of it, the zone of the ineffable O, if you want to use a Beyondian term. But even if we don't want to mystify or make it more esoteric, we already are dealing with a very elusive process. At least the 4 things that I mentioned out, they definitely constitute a very secular force field, so to say. Beyond would put the 5th term of the ineffable O, but I would put the 5th term as karma oblique O oblique self journey oblique self journey of the universe oblique the karma of the universe. So that would make it more esoteric and mystical in one sense, but you can remove that part and look at the secular 4 if you want to do a more secular analysis of it. But I would prefer a more holistic analysis rather than a secular analysis of this point of transformation, because my idea is that the holistic framework is the framework we will have to enter into to understand better transformation. It is not possible beyond the point to understand transformation in the current secular frameworks we are operating in.
It.
Can you repeat? I could not get the question.
Can we go deeper into the aspect of the state? I believe the state of the person when the transformation is happening, I guess.
So one of the factors in transformation is the state. The psychological state of the person is a very important variable of transformation process. Take an example. Let us say you give money to some friend of yours, and the friend of yours does not pay you back when you are in an emergency. And when that happens, you are in a real crisis. Now, in that state of crisis, you may decide never to lend money to that friend again. This advice would have been given to you by many people in the past, which you found not easy to accept, although reasons were given. Now, suddenly, in a flash, you decide that this is the way to go. I won't lend any more money to that person again. A very difficult to be brought about transformation in you has happened. Many people, many friends tried to bring about this transformation before, could not succeed, but now it is happening all by itself inside of you. And that is because of the state of the crisis. So what does the state of the crisis do? The state of the crisis where transformation becomes easy has these characteristics. One, it is a state of crisis. It is not a state of everyday. There is some crisis. Stakes are high. Prospect of pleasure or pain are high, and mostly it is pain which is high. Two, it is a state of high awareness. It is a state of very high awareness, very intense awareness. Three, it is a state of high energy. Four, it is a state of high concentration. Fifth, it is a state of optimum anxiety. Not too high to cripple, not too low that you are not on your toes. Sixth, the anxiety is not so much that you cannot think clearly. And seven, in that state, defenses are not able to waylay you, and you are able to think very clearly about the causality of the problem. And there is no more confusion, no more defenses, no more pathology at work in that particular state. Now, this is the state in which you are able to think clearly without any confusion or any reservation about the causality. You are able to clearly decide how to heal yourself, what measures to take, and you are able to bring about a fundamental change in yourself, a fundamental restructuring in the psyche. And even after the crisis is over, that fundamental restructuring will stay with you. And this is also a state of catharsis where intense feelings are felt for something. So this is the state which is very conducive to transformation, a state of crisis. And we are not referring to a crisis which is so intense that it paralyzes you, or a very small crisis you don't care about. So it is an optimum crisis. Now, in that optimum crisis, transformation is easy. Now, there are two learnings from this. One, if we want to accelerate transformation and healing, we have to create some state in the individual which is conducive to healing and transformation. This can be done by mimicking this state that I described. How do you create optimum anxiety, optimum affect, high awareness, high concentration in the moment? How do you dismantle the defenses? So this is one way of looking at it, and this is used in ISTDP. Creating an artificial crisis where rapid transformation can take place. Some people believe that while this is one state in which we naturally find transformation easy. There can be very alternative state, very different kinds of states where a similar or better transformation can happen. So those who practice hypnotherapy, they create the state of trance, where they believe in that state, quicker, deeper, better transformation can happen. In psychoanalytic psychotherapy, we create the state by the person being on the couch and imposing this whole frame of psychoanalysis. So this is the third way. In spirituality, the whole setup is used to create a state of transformation which is quite different. Particularly in Bhakti Yoga, that state is created by using intense emotions. Emotion is at the center, very positive emotion is at the center, and other things are used as less intense entities to create the state of transformation. In Jnana Yoga, the observation and the thought are used primarily as the strongest element, and other elements are used in lesser intensities. Now, states of transformation can also be brought about by just intense observation. And this is a contribution from the East, that when we talk about state of transformation, the state most conducive to transformation, just closing the eyes, observing oneself, which is the method of Vipassana, and which is a very old ancient Indian technique of meditation, an intense state is created. And this intense state of inner absorption can also help us in moving on to transformation. So this is where the state creation and state use lies. In Western psychotherapy today, you can classify therapies into two. Those therapies which create a state and then use their techniques and tools after the state is created. And you would have their techniques like psychoanalysis, ISTDP, psychodrama, hypnotherapy. And on the other hand, you will have state agnostic psychotherapy approaches like cognitive therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, logotherapy, humanistic therapy. These are sort of state agnostic therapies. They don't really create a state and then use their tools and techniques. But state is a very important variable of the process of transformation, and every process of transformation has similarly to be gone in depth of to really understand the process of transformation.
Does transformation happen equally in active and passive healing approaches?
It's a difficult question because in active healing approaches, we want the patient to actively participate in the healing process. Psychotherapy, Western psychotherapy particularly, is a very active healing process. If we look at passive healing approaches, it can be medication, allopathy or homeopathy or Ayurveda, any medical system. But once you are taking medicines, it's a passive healing approach. There are certain things which can be in between. For example, Reiki and pranic healing, they can be used in active and passive modes both. If you do it to yourself, it's an active healing process. Somebody else does it to you, it becomes a passive healing process. Now, does transformation happen in both the processes? Yes. Does it happen equally? Difficult to say. If we look at mild, moderate, and severe, it is very difficult to apply active healing processes in severe cases. So in severe cases, there is no option most of the times but to go for passive healing, and bring the person to a stage where he can participate in an active healing process. One part of it. Second part of it, if the person wants not only cessation of symptoms, but a very deep-rooted understanding of oneself, then active healing only can help him. So if he wants only healing, maybe he has both the options. If he wants healing and self-understanding, then only active healing can help in self-understanding. So when we look at self-understanding and self-growth, active healing is the only approach which works there. Many cases, both of them have to be used together. And it becomes very difficult to say which healing effect has been produced by which approach. When it comes to mild, the person again may have any option and both may work equally. When it comes to severe, only the passive will work. Right? Active will be secondary for quite some time before the person can actually become capable of an active process. And in moderate cases, active can become much better than the passive. But if we are not getting results, there is no way but to deploy the passive healing methods to really help us out. So instead of looking at it as an or situation, I would rather look at it as an and situation. That active versus passive, instead of that, active and passive. And I would say with the professional, the person does active part of it, and on his own between two sessions, he can be in the passive part of it, and which need not only be medication, it can be many relaxation and meditative techniques, many beliefs which are very powerful but passive in their constitution.
Western psychotherapy is based on the premise of active healing and the use of will. So can healing also happen in a different way, involving, say, observation and surrender, which is, I think, mostly Eastern, as we have already talked?
Yes, it can happen, but we have to be careful that we don't get into severe situations, severe cases in this situation. But that part apart, transformation happens in both active and passive healing methods. And in passive healing methods, there are many ways of passive healing methods. Some ways only involve observation. Some ways involve relaxation. Now you can say observation and relaxation themselves are active processes. So they are not active processes, but they are processes which sort of prepare you for a passive healing. So the change here happens in a very interesting way. For example, in a passive healing process, let us say just observation, there is a set of events which happens in the internal world. Say for example, another process of the passive type can be something which is in between, actually not fully passive. Say Sri Aurobindo's method of aspiration, rejection and surrender. So you have an aspiration to be well, you reject with full conviction all that stands in the way, and then you surrender yourself to the omnipotent power or to God to heal you. And you proceed on that way with some time. And obviously, events will happen. It's not going to happen in the moment. Life will proceed, events will happen, you will be dealing with things, and ultimately some healing is seen. Now, this is an experience of many people who have followed this method in Pondicherry. I'm not sure if somebody has documented it, but if you document it, the real just becomes official. But instances of transformation are there without any doubt. That being so, we can see how people get healed with meditation, different forms of meditation, with relaxation, different forms of relaxation, and with observational techniques. And therefore, this gives us an idea that at least in mild to moderate cases, passive healing can produce transformation no less than active forms of healing. Now, at what pace is a different question. Perhaps we will have a variety here, and in exceptional cases, the passive part can produce quicker results than the active, but as a rule, the active way of healing is believed to produce quicker results than the passive route. And in the passive route, many times people become frustrated and they leave it halfway. And that becomes tragic because many people go to the passive part, leave it halfway, and when it does not get results, don't even go to the active part. And that is one of the dangers of somebody taking to the passive part and not using active part at all. At that level, it becomes almost like a dogma rather than a preference.
How does it work in practice actually, this process of healing without active work of the will?
Element is well known in the East. Not one, but a few things are well known in the East of how this transformation takes place without using the classical approaches. One is, from our point of view, it is internalization of an omnipotent good object. In some way, either with the healer or the guru or with God or whatever process one has followed, there is an internalization of a good, reliable, omnipotent, stable object. One part. Second part is more secular in the sense there is some sort of a process involved in the process of observation. What happens is, the moment the will starts observing, the process which has to be healed, initially what is being observed becomes more intense. And over a period of time, that intensity falls down. So this enhance, the increase and then reduction, the almost like a sine wave, increase and then reduction of intensity of what is observed happens. And this is the process which is believed to be the healing process causing transformation. That whatever you observe initially becomes more intense, then the intensity falls and it falls forever, and the thing God gets healed. Now, what is the dynamic in more elemental terms? I have described it in the heat model, where one way to describe it metaphorically is to say, the moment you observe something, the affinity gets deposited more onto it, and this draws more life energy initially. As you keep observing it, the affinity which is drawn towards it slowly gets erased in the fire of observation, and that releases back the energy. That is a metaphorical explanation of how the observational process actually works. So this is the second way of looking at it. The third way is to say, when you give it to an omnipotent object to heal for yourself the problem, inside the mind an omnipotent object is created, and that actually works out the healing process. Fourth is to say, this is a mystical process, and what you are offering to some omnipotent agency, that agency is there and the agency is healing it. So that is a theistic explanation of it. So these are the various processes, and very important element in the observational process is this, that the observational process is not the process of falling into inertia. Passive healing is not inertia. There is a sort of a sacred passivity. So we have to define a passivity of inertia and the sacred passivity of the observational process or the healing process. So when you are into passive healing process, you are into that process of sacred passivity, where you are very aware, very intensely concentrated, not concentrated in the usual sense of the term, but focused, solemnly convinced about moving towards healing. And that state is quite different from the state of inertia and indolence, of not doing anything at all, not wishing for anything at all. So this is what we know. Now there is obviously an elusive part, the unknown part of this whole transformation process of passive healing, just as it is in the case of active healing. In passive healing, we know the process of transformation even less than we know in the active healing part. One reason is passive healing techniques have not been used or explored enough in Western psychotherapy. And the empirical researches have happened in the Western psychotherapy area, not in the Eastern area, which is where we have to do more about it. And therefore, neither the easily knowable parts nor the elusive parts of the passive healing approach we really know empirically.
Is the root of observation and surrender not weakening of the will? On
the contrary, it strengthens the will, because when you are resolved and consolidated in the healing process, the will is not scattered on 5 different activities. It is all the energy and all the concentration is collected and made into one coherent whole. Second, because you believe in an omnipotent good object or omnipotent good destination, that strengthens the will. Third, there is a very strong element of superego strength and superego happiness which is mobilized in the process, and they actually make you stronger, not weaker.
So can we say that the person is more in a receptive mode, in that passive mode when you see?
Not only in the receptive mode, he actually receives, internalizes, and changes the inside, whereby he is actually in a much stronger position than when he was in the active mode, when he was scattered in 10 different things. And therefore, if we see, even in the active modes of healing, in the advanced stages, they start resembling more and more the passive modes of healing.
Does the Eastern approach involve the concept of the doer and the done?
Yes. There are 2 ways here. In Western psychotherapy also now we have the ideas of the participating ego and the observing ego. Additional idea, and both of them are actually Eastern ideas. It's not nothing new in psychoanalysis. It's a borrowed concept from the East. Second idea is, what are the causes why any event should happen? And when we go into this idea of what are the causes why any event should happen, it leads us to the point that apart from our free will, there are many other factors which lead to a particular event. And that being the case, all that happens is not because of our free will. And once we realize that, the limitation of the free will and the immense power of the non-free will part of causation, that becomes very clear. And with that, we become more of an observing player rather than a narcissistic solo player. And that leads to a very good situation where, for example, if the anxiety mounts and we only look at it as an observer, neither as a creator nor as a victim, it leads to a strange state where it's almost like anxiety gets anxious as to why we are not overwhelmed by that upsurge of anxiety. So it may cover the will, but it cannot destabilize or erode the will. And once the stable ego, stable observer continues and survives, the overwhelming effervescence or the life energy also recedes, and the distance is created between the anxiety and the observing ego, and that is where the healing slowly starts. Then the life energy starts getting detached from that anxiety generating complex and is moving towards the awareness observing will, the aware observing will, and that produces a very good healing outcome. This is very ancient Eastern concept, and believing in events which can happen without the active participation of us within ourselves is not abdicating the sanity of the ego. It is inviting forces or inviting events where things happen beyond our power of will to execute and achieve inside of us. And that's quite a different situation than the situation of helplessness and throwing in the towel. These are very different things. So, the ability to see events as without being the doer and yet not feeling helpless, powerless, or disintegration, or any sort of reduction in psychological health is a progress on the right track. It's not a regression.
Approaches.
Sorry, can you say it again?
In holistic healing, also, do we have similar healing approaches?
Yes. In holistic healing, we have approaches where we use the will and the power of the will. And you can see many techniques in Jainism and Buddhism where the power of the will is used. And we can also see in pranic healing and Reiki, also the power of the will can be used. And similarly, there are areas of surrender which we find in Bhakti Yoga or we find in Reiki and pranic healing itself, where the surrender is used to higher beings or to higher forces or to goodness. And both these forces produce results varying from person to person, pathology to pathology, intensity to intensity, but both of them do produce results, and both have to be studied more before we can really integrate them into the mainstream. But they are very powerful approaches yet to be fully explored.
we come to our last question. Can holistic healing and spirituality in active and passive modes be deployed to help the transformation in psychoanalysis?
Definitely, yes. We can take active healing processes from spirituality. We can take passive healing processes from spirituality and either make them parts of the larger psychoanalytic process by casting them in psychoanalytic language and assimilating them in a way which is congruent to the whole enterprise, or we can use them between two sessions. This is not something anybody has done in a popular way. People may have tried in isolated instances, but nothing which is very popular. But this larger integration of the East and the West, of spirituality and holistic healing techniques into psychoanalysis, of looking at active and passive modes of healing, understanding them, how they work, in what instances they work, how best they can be assimilated into psychoanalysis. All of this is, I think, something that will be central enrichment of psychoanalysis in the next 5 to 10 years. And one element very critical to this can be that once these things get proven, it may lead to a very different model of the mind, and from there to a very different paradigm of psychoanalysis, which involves our view of the human mind and our view of reality.
Can we say that the clients in the eastern part of the world who are undergoing psychotherapy or psychoanalysis, I'm sure unconsciously and consciously they must be deploying this other healing approaches. If the therapist does or not, one doesn't know, but the clients possibly might be doing on their own.
Very true in the East. In fact, it is not reported so much in the journals and in the literature and so on, but it's very common in the East. Clients are far ahead of the profession in terms of integrating East and the West. And holistic healing already has started at the client level on a very large scale, unreported, unacknowledged, undocumented, unstudied by the profession.
Okay, Mr. Vaidya, thank you so much for this very fascinating session on transformation, healing, and change. We look forward to more information on this because I think this topic is too wide and too deep to cover it in such a short time. Do write to us at hvindia@gmail.com. Namaste.
Namaste.